Now, the Three Martini Lunch with Greg Corombos and Jim Garrity.
And welcome, everyone, to the Wednesday edition of the Three Martini Lunch, along with Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Corombos of Radio America. Good, open to interpretation, and crazy martinis for conservatives today. Let's start with the good. And, Jim, obviously, we lasted hours and hours and hours before we found out that Hillary Clinton apparently technically won the Iowa caucuses, but the more we look into this, the more it looks a little bit shady. There's some stories of shenanigans with different precincts. There's, of course, the story that Bernie Sanders, among precincts where there was actually a definitive outcome, won by 2 precincts, and then Hillary Clinton won 6 consecutive coin flips to actually win the whole thing by 4 precincts. So there's a report from Chad Pergram, the well-respected Capitol Hill reporter for Fox News, that Bernie Sanders is thinking about challenging this. Already the Democratic media is swarming, saying it's time to move on, nothing to see here, don't be a sore loser, and that sort of thing. So we'll see if he actually does it, but it's fascinating to watch how the Democrats are trying to paint this as a big win for Hillary when, at the very least, she barely won, and there's a good chance between shenanigans and an odd circumstance of coin flips, she barely squeaked through.
You know, Greg, here we are. It is February 3rd. It is Wednesday morning. The caucus has been over for more than 24 hours. So how many votes did Hillary get?
Nobody knows.
How many votes did Sanders get?
Nobody knows.
We get this like algebra level complicated algorithm that they've gotten 655, whatever it is, equivalent, delegate equivalent units or something like that. Maybe Chafee did win, and all of a sudden we're having to force the metric system or something, because you would think, yes, I understand, if they don't make a minimum threshold, everybody's then allowed to kind of reallocate who they're supporting and things like that. But you'd think you'd keep track of that, right? It just seems very bizarre that you wouldn't keep track of who voted for who. That's kind of at the core of the election, right? Like, counting the votes is kind of important. This is the second time today I've had to kind of explain basic things to people. The first part was when Jim Gilmore said he wasn't really trying to win Iowa. You may have missed that, Greg. All of a sudden, I turned into Herm Edwards. The point of the game is to win the game. That's why you play the game. You don't just play it to just play it. I spent a lot of time practicing my Herm Edwards impression. But the point being, the Democratic Party of Iowa is saying, Hillary won. Trust us. It's perfectly normal that we're doing coin flips to determine the winner at some level. It's not the least bit hanky that one candidate's doing way better than the other in these totally random 50-50 coin flips. And trust us, it's over. Hillary's the winner. Move on. Stop looking over here. Return to your homes, citizens. There's nothing else to see here. I mean, Bernie Sanders, as much as you and I make fun of him, he seems to have a legitimate case. Hey, can I at least get the vote totals? Can I at least get can we at least get a sense of who voted for who? And when the Democratic Party says no, I don't want to fan the flames of paranoia, but that does emit an odor now, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You got the party looking very bad here. You've got the system obviously looking very bad here. And
this is the second straight cycle. We come out of Iowa and we're not 100% sure who won. Because they could have. Last time it was Santorum and Romney. On the caucus night, the word is up. Romney won by 8. Everything's, congratulations, Romney. They come back a few weeks later and say, hey, remember we told you Romney won? Never mind about that. We miscounted. We're pretty sure it was Santorum. He's up 34 in our most recent count, but we lost like a box of ballots and we don't know where they are. And so our best guess is that Santorum won. And you guys get to go first? What?
Yes, this is not good for the Iowa system at all. You'd think that the Sanders people would have kept track of numbers from precinct to precinct, but then again, it's Bernie Sanders, so you never know for sure.
Socialists are not good with math, right? That's
But secondly, it's obvious, of course, who the party wants to win the nomination, because whenever it's one of their preferred Democrats who's behind after the official count, they're more than happy to let everyone sit through a prolonged fight. See Al Gore, see Al Franken. But when it's their person who squeaked through under questionable circumstances, nothing to see here. Don't be a sore loser. Everybody
fall
move
in
on.
line. Obey the collective.
Amazing. All right, on to the unofficially titled second martini. Rand Paul became the latest Republican presidential candidate to bow out today. That brings us down to 10. which will either make for a really big debate stage on Saturday night or a really tiny undercard debate. One of the two. I don't know exactly how the party will determine all that, but nonetheless, Rand Paul is out. He released a statement earlier today saying he's still going to be fighting for liberty because he's still going to be running for re-election to the U.S. Senate this year, and he plans to continue fighting as he has in that capacity for the next 6 years and perhaps beyond. So, Jim, a number of ways to look at this. It clearly wasn't likely to happen for Rand Paul, and people were getting skittish about him staying in the campaign so long and not pivoting back to the Senate campaign if it wasn't going to happen for the GOP presidential nomination. On the other hand, given all the oxygen that Trump and perhaps others have gotten in this campaign, Rand Paul never got much of an airing, and while he might not be the preferred choice of a lot of Republicans, as we're obviously seeing, he has an important message that the party needs to bring into the fold here, and it just didn't get that much attention.
If you're looking to say this is a second good martini, this is, good news for Republican hopes of keeping the Senate. Rand Paul is, if not quite bulletproof in the Kentucky Senate race, a very strong favorite for re-election. And he should be fine if he actually had gotten the nomination. And, Kentucky Republicans had to find, I guess the plan was he was going to run for both. Yes. And that it caused some headaches, and Democrats had done their best to louse it up. So Kentucky was going to have to use a caucus instead of a primary. So it's very long and complicated. The short version is now, because he's no longer running for president, it simplifies things. The bad martini is that even though I probably was not likely to vote for Rand Paul, there's a lot to like about this guy. This is a man who thinks deeply about policy, who's not afraid to call for new ideas and new approaches, even if they're going to be controversial or might rub some people the wrong way. At his heart, he's pretty libertarian. And I think if you really want to give this one as a really bad martini, the libertarian moment, Greg, turned out to be a moment. Right. There it was. That's gone. And I think that even though I don't see down the line with libertarians on every single issue, it is good for the Republican Party to have somebody at the table who says, kind of begins every conversation with, wait a second, should the federal government even be doing this? And sometimes the answer will be yes. Sometimes the answer is going to be no. But, libertarians like to, their number one value is individual liberty, and their number one concern is runaway government power. And their aim is to minimize the reach of the state. And there's a lot to like about that. And so with any luck, Rand Paul will continue to be a strong voice in the Senate for a lot of years. He'll continue to influence the debate. But I also, in light of my piece yesterday, I kind of salute him for looking at the handwriting on the wall and saying, you know what, this is just not going to happen for me this year. I'm going to stop this and focus on having influence on our government in another way.
Yes. And, of course, the Democrats with the double standard, they're complaining about the process for picking Paul to run for Senate again in 2016. This is the same party that ran Lloyd Bentsen for vice president and the Senate in 1988, and Joe Lieberman for vice president and the Senate in 2000. So consistency has never been one of their hallmarks. But
it's wrong when the other guys do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. On to the crazy martini now. And after a stunningly longer than usual Twitter hiatus, Donald Trump is back in the game following his second-place finish in Iowa, retweeting some people and then tweeting out kind of a Twitter rant of his own. One of the ones that he tweeted out, Jim, as I'm sure you're aware, is Iowa is meaningless. Keep pushing forward. But then he must have had a change of heart because he found out about not only the Ted Cruz mailer that was well discussed before caucus night, but the complaints from the Carson campaign that their very bizarrely timed announcement that Ben Carson was going to be taking a few days off right as people were starting to vote was interpreted by CNN and then the Cruz campaign that Carson was about ready to wrap things up. That was fraud on the part of the Carson campaign. So we've got, here, Ted Cruz didn't win Iowa. He stole it. That is why all the polls were so wrong and why he got far more votes than anticipated. Bad. During prime time of the Iowa caucus, Cruz put out a release that real Ben Carson was quitting the race in a caucus or vote for Cruz. Many people voted for Cruz over Carson because of this Cruz fraud. And on it goes. And so he says, based on the fraud committed by Senator Ted Cruz during the Iowa caucus, either a new election should take place or Cruz results nullified. So, Jim, apparently it's hard for a leopard to change its spots.
I was going to say, when we look back on that brief, gracious, and really kind of high-minded concession speech that Donald Trump gave Monday night, Greg, do you think Trump was heavily medicated?
I don't know.
Right. I mean, like this, we were all kind of pleasantly surprised by that. Wow, he really took the high road. Okay, good. Hey, yeah, maybe Trump is growing, and whatever it was, it wore off this morning. because all of a sudden, blah, I mean, I've seen a lot of this is unfair. I got treated unfairly, but I don't think I've ever seen a candidate say, no, you have to have a revote. Redo. That one doesn't count. Never mind. You can tell the grade school people I've been hanging around when they say, no, I'm losing. Redo, start over. Or just or Cruz results nullified. Boy, that would be convenient, wouldn't it? Let's just disqualify the guy who finished ahead of me, so I'm in first place and all that stuff. But think about it at the heart, and we could argue a little about Cruz's actions here. One, that voter violation flyer was stupid, and he shouldn't have sent it out. You should not send something official looking that makes people think they're in legal trouble because they haven't voted. You are free in this country to not vote, and if you ever get one of these messages, crumple it up and toss it in the waste paper basket or do whatever you feel is appropriate with it. Shred it like the final vote totals in Iowa if you're a Democrat. That was stupid, but he's had Ted Cruz got 48 hours of bad press out of it right before the voting. So really, I think if anything, that probably hurt him more than it helped him. Secondly, this tale that, because of the rumor going around, coming from a poorly worded or not terribly clear CNN report that said that, Ben Carson is going to take some time away from the campaign to go to Florida. And people from that interpreted that to mean Ben Carson was quitting. Now, this is because Ben Carson, according to his campaign, ran out of clothes. There are no clothes stores in Iowa, apparently. His staff must have been telling him he was really starting to get gamey and it's time for some fresh clothes, doctor. Based on that, people thought, the Cruz campaign interpreted that as Carson was quitting. Carson is, as far as we know, is not quitting. There's no indication that he is. He just needed to go back to Florida for a few days. He shouldn't have done this. Having said that, Greg, let's picture that under the Trump scenario. I'm a Ben Carson supporter in Iowa. I love my guy. I'm proud of my guy. He's the best choice. I show up at my caucus place, and somebody from Ted Cruz's supporter says, hey, did you see this? Carson's out. Okay. I don't bother to check my phone. I don't bother to talk to any other Ben Carson supporters there. I don't call anybody. I don't try to verify it. I just abandoned my guy because a Ted Cruz supporter said he's out. I don't think that happened. I'm really rather, and if you did, boy, you're really wishy-washy, aren't you? You were really not that committed to Ben Carson in the first place. You really should be a little more discerning in your information diet, I think. So I don't buy this idea. I think it was the wrong thing for Ted Cruz to do, but I also went back and looked. Ben Carson finished about 2 points ahead of where he was in the polls, in the average of the last couple of polls. So there's really no evidence that Ben Carson had this sudden drop-off on caucus night that can be explained by this rumor. But the bottom line is, now Ted, as much as we figured there would be some sort of epic tantrum meltdown from Donald Trump, here it is. And for the first time in recent memory, I've not seen a candidate say, we need to have a revote. The whole thing is a fake. The whole thing's a fraud. I'm out of order. You're out of order. This whole caucus is out of order.
Well, Ben Carson got 9% of the votes, 17,395 votes. Ted Cruz beat Donald Trump by more than 6,000 votes. So that would be what? Like over a quarter of Ben Carson's supporters en masse all going over to Ted Cruz. Doesn't seem all that likely.
This is, Donald Trump wanting to find some reason to argue that what happened didn't really happen, to remain in denial, to insist he's a real winner. And by the way, along the way, try to paint Ted Cruz as this shady, dishonest guy who did that. Now, having said that, Ben Carson fans are probably going to have a chip on their shoulder when it comes to Ted Cruz from here on out. And anybody who got one of those flyers might be thinking not as well of Ted Cruz as they did before. So, if you want to argue that the Ted Cruz campaign is skating on thin ice, you can make that case. But no, Donald, you don't get to redo the Iowa caucus because of it.
Well, he might show up at an event with Bernie Sanders here pretty quick since they both feel like they got jobbed, but only one of them might have a case to make here. Jim, fascinating now with just 6 days to go before the next vote in New Hampshire.
Can't wait, Greg.
Talk to you Friday.
See you Friday.
Jim Garrity of National Review. I'm Greg Columbus of Radio America. Thanks for being with us today, and be sure to tune in again on Thursday for the next 3 Martini Lunch.